Hi everyone, this is Himanshu Sehgal. I am co-founder Pharma Shots. Today with me is Michael. Michael is a vice president partnership at Fire Health. I met Michael at Reuters Pharma Barcelona event, which was happening in Barcelona, organized by Reuters. So I was there. I attended the session. Michael's session title was "Bridging the Gap: Leveraging Data, Tech, RWE for enhanced healthcare access and market growth." So it is obviously the mouthful of the title, but the session was really great, and I thought that it would be really valuable for all of us to hear from Michael. And I invited him, and he has been gracious enough to give his time uh, to talk about what was the session all about, what's his viewpoint on the topic. So thank you so much, Michael, for taking out time and talking to Pharma Shots. So without further ado, I would like to first, ask you this question. Your session actually emphasizes on this bridging the gap. So from your perspective, what is the biggest gap in the healthcare access, in the present times, especially in the marginalized and underserved patients, basically? So what is your thought process on that?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a great question. I think it's not just about access to care. Ultimately, it's also about the timeliness and the appropriateness of care. And so we think about marginalized populations, they're often left out not only because of geography or income, but ultimately because the system isn't designed to recognize them as data points worth optimizing for. So for example, in clinical trials, an area that we spend a lot of time in, we still see a systematic underrepresentation of certain demographics, patients of color, more rural populations, or older adults. And that's not just an equity issue, it actually skews the entire evidence base and leads to therapies that work well in controlled settings, but could ultimately fail in the real world. So in oncology, for example, we certainly see that some of the more novel treatments, immunotherapies, for example, then are also ultimately significantly lower, see significantly lower uptake in certain geographies, depending on where patients live. Another gap in this is what I would refer to as somewhat of an operational invisibility. So a lot of patients are simply missing, not just missing from care, but they're missing from the systems that track it. And we need a better way of linking disparate data sources, and a lot of the fragmentation in the healthcare system also leads to journeys not being brought together into actionable insights. And that impacts how we surface patients for trials, how we help them navigate the healthcare system, and also how you tailor interventions in the system at the system level. So that lack of interoperability between healthcare systems, data collection methods is certainly one that also impacts how we even understand patient journeys, and has a lot of downstream impacts on care.
Okay, a very basic question, which is outside the topic. What inspired you to work or to work in the healthcare access domain, basically, and then the data-driven solution, developing a data-driven solutions?
Yep. Yeah, I'm originally a health economist by background. I spent the last 15 years now working across different healthcare systems, and ultimately at the intersection of healthcare providers, payers, and life sciences developing tools. And what's really driven me is seeing how deeply the structure of our healthcare system limits access and progress, especially in areas like oncology or complicated diseases. So it's not just about data being fragmented, but also how that fragmentation reinforces certain biases we have, delays in innovation, and in a way it obscures what's actually working for patients. So what I've focused my career on is really thinking through what solutions can be built that don't just digitize a workflow, but or collect data for the sake of it, but they actually create real leverage for a system. How do I accelerate a clinical trial? How do I surface an underrepresented population? How do I help bring the right treatments to patients faster? And that operational side of it, so the actual impact from these insights is something that I'm certainly very invested in, and that I think is what makes it fun to really think through solutions that don't just look good on paper, but they're scalable, that are resilient, and then that are commercially viable.
Awesome. Another question comes to mind is, and then you have actually touched upon that during your conversation. You spoke about real world evidences. So, what kind of a role do you see in future? Obviously, real world evidence is buzz of the town right now, and a lot of people are talking about it. But how do you see it evolving in the future? And trying to mitigate or address the disparities in terms of access. So how I know these are two things a bit different, but what are your thoughts on that?
Mhm. Yeah, I think real world evidence plays a uniquely powerful role in exposing and in addressing disparities. Because if you think about collecting data in the real world, unlike traditional clinical trials, it actually reflects the messiness, the diversity of what real patients go through across
Yeah.
race, income, geography, and care settings. And specifically, I think, firstly, it helps us identify gaps. We've used in our organization real-world evidence to analyze how treatment patterns can differ across populations. For instance, time to treatment among racial groups or access differentials tied to a specific policy or geography. And those are not just descriptive insights, they actually help inform where a healthcare system can deploy resources or policies, um, and design interventions to address that. Secondly, it expands access. A great example here is we've actually helped support a label expansion for a specific drug for men with breast cancer. So that's a population that's usually excluded from initial trials.
Yeah.
We've also seen an approval of a revised dosing regimen for a cancer therapy in bowel cancer, which ultimately spares patients from unnecessary toxicity and the logistics of having to see more the healthcare system more. And finally, real world evidence can also help shape how we actually run trials. You can show which eligibility criteria are potentially restrictive. How do we design studies that are more inclusive, that are more representative, while not having to sacrifice quality? And I think that's the kind of shift, data-driven shift, that doesn't just improve how we can broaden access for patients, but in a way redefine it through a data backbone.
Got it. Another, and this might not sound like a great question because, but this was kind of a theme at the conference. A lot of people were talking about AI and obviously digital technologies and all. So how do you see AI and digital technologies being used to address this gap in the healthcare access at a global level?
Yeah, I think it's without a doubt that AI and digital technologies are actively reshaping how we deliver care. I think the big question is, can we build them intentionally so that they can also help drive equity in healthcare?
Yeah.
And underpinning that is, of course, always a risk that if you have them poorly trained, or if there's biases, they can reinforce what is currently a lack of equity in the system. But at the same time, when it's done right, these tools can actually correct for some of these gaps, and often systemic gaps that we see in systems. For example, by surfacing patients that we'd otherwise miss. So a few examples that come to mind. So we've seen AI being a really powerful tool to flag patients that are at risk of being lost to follow-up, or to triage referrals more equitably, based on who really needs care, not just who has advantages at navigating complicated healthcare systems. I also believe that certain digital tools can, in a way, extend the reach into more rural or underserved populations without needing to build more physical infrastructure. And then ultimately applying large language models, machine learning more broadly to real world data also allows you to identify some of the disparities that exist in whether it's access or outcomes in a way that traditional systems can, because they simply don't have the resources for it, and that way you can target more precisely. So I'd say that the theme in my mind is one of appreciating the fact that you need to embed equity into the ultimate development process itself. So how do you train algorithms on representative data sets? How do you actually stress test the outputs for certain biases that exist? And ultimately involve the right communities, academic, technical, social, that are affected in how we design and then deploy what we learn from this.
Awesome. So that kind of sums up my all the questions I had. This just last bit I want to ask, and then I'm asking this to everyone that how do you see next 5 years being shaping up for the healthcare industry? Again, your personal thoughts. How do you see that shaping up?
Yeah, I think we're at the precipice of really figuring out tactical ways of embedding technology and AI across everything that we do. Healthcare usually is a risk-averse industry where that change doesn't happen as fast as in other places. At the same
Yeah.
time, in line with what we talked through, I think there is now an obligation for us to find ways to deploy to save resources, to identify patients more equitably, and ultimately pull through a lot of the challenges that we've been talking about for many, many decades into real actions. I think the opportunity is there. What is certainly real is the regulatory and organizational restrictions that we need to overcome. Whether those are incentives built into different healthcare systems, slow processes on things like approving new therapies into a market, or the lack of digital infrastructure to even have systems talk to each other, information being shared across each other. So I think that is a combination of really being forward looking in terms of the policies across different geographies. There is a need for us to also leverage information and insights from one place and apply it somewhere else, such as where data from the US, for example, can be useful in helping determine what works well in populations in Europe, where market access decisions are often later than is the case in the US. But also really appreciating the potential and thinking bold, and I think that's what we're set out to do right now.
Awesome. So thank you so much. It was lovely talking to you, Michael, and thank you for so much for your thoughts. I hope to connect with you very soon and for another conversation in a more detailed way. So thank you once again for your time and look forward to meeting you again. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.